that cost the federal government over 700 million naira.
In view of the impact mining activities are having on the environment and other health challenges, interministerial collaboration between the Ministry of Environment and that of Mines and Steel Development came to effect, and mining companies are now compelled to take responsibility of any impact their activities are having on the environment.
While one believes in the exploration and exploitation of our natural resources for national development and for the upliftment of our people, it should not be done at the detriment of the health of our dear citizens.
In all, environment experts see the attendance of President Muhammadu Buhari on major international conferences on environment matters as a demonstration of strong political will. Mie Ogidi, NT News.
All right, that report sets the tone for tonight's discussion. Let's start off by introducing our guests. We'd like to welcome to this program Minister of Environment, Suleiman Hassan Zarma. Minister, thanks for being here tonight.
Thank you.
We're also joined tonight by Dr. Marvin Dekil, Project Coordinator, Hydrocarbon Pollution Remediation Project, Ogoni Cleanup. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
All right. Let me also welcome to this program Chambers Omezulike, Senior Programs Manager, Connected for Development. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
We're also joined tonight by Dr. Peter Tafa, Director of Climate Change and Nigeria's focal person. Thanks for being here.
It's a pleasure.
Let me welcome Dr. Shola Adipoju, Director General, CEO of Forestry Research Institute of Nigeria. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
And joining us from our Lagos Network Center is Dr. Muktari Aminu Kanu, Director General, Nigerian Conservation Foundation. He joins us from our Lagos studio. Thanks for being with us tonight.
Good evening.
Full house, and that tells you how important the environment is. And so let me, as usual, acquaint you with the procedure. At the appropriate time, you can get to be part of the discussion in the studio. The various platforms will be there on your screens. You can take advantage of them. However, as we always say every Tuesday, for those who are calling in tonight, do us a favor. When your call gets through, turn down the volume of your TV set. Just reduce the volume. That's the way to avoid the hurlback or the echo. And the best way to know that your call has been passed through to the studio, you'll see your name appear on screen. Now, once that happens, it means that your call is through direct to the studio. Once you see your name, just go right ahead, ask a question, make your comment, just make your contribution straight away. Don't bother about the greetings. You might not have much time to do that. Just go straight to the point and keep it short so others can also get on the platform. So once again, thanks for joining us on NTA Tuesday Live. It's all about the environment tonight, and so let's begin turning to the minister and finding out just what it is like, because you hear all kinds of things about the environment, and at some point in time, some people might just worry and say, do we really have a safe environment in Nigeria? Because there have been so many things about what the environment is, degradation and all that. So let's start from that premise.
Very well. Good evening, viewers. The environment, of course, is something that everybody is interested in, because everything happens in an environment. And when you hear environment or the biological profit of the land, of the environment is lost. So you hear degradation. And when that happens, it also has an economic component, a health component, and so on. So it will interest any person what happens within his environment from either our actions or from some natural causes. What are our actions? Our maybe methods of farming, increase in population, so need for more spaces to either build or do some other activity, cutting down of trees to get energy, and so on and so forth. These are man-made things that will impact on the environment, and so people should be interested in what happens. Now, what are the natural causes? Natural causes could be, of course, erosion or desertification, like you rightly mentioned in the introduction. So I think this is what generates interest in people on what happens in the environment.
All right, we'll come to them, but development also comes with its own price. And when we talk about hydrocarbons, and yes, you've got the liquid gold under the surface of the earth, but in putting that to good use, there are also challenges. So how bad is the situation regarding hydrocarbons in this country?
Well, like you rightly stated, a hydrocarbon, it's a source of energy, and there is intensive demand for it. There is high demand for it across the world. Here in Nigeria, it's a main source of income for us, and that means that the commercial activities relating to hydrocarbon abound. And the region where this is done also have come with its consequences. One of it, which is the oil spill. And we know the reason the oil could be spilled through actions of the community, the oil companies, and other things. But the fact remains that we have oil spill in our environment. And government has come over the years, very particularly the government of President Buhari, has gone ahead to respond to over 4 decades of spillage in the country. And that followed an initial report that was done in Ogoniland and in 4 local governments of Tai, Gokana, and Elime, and Kana as well. And that report, which was submitted in 2011, only got implemented 2017 with the present administration. And what we've gone ahead to do is reach out to the community, let them understand the need to clean their land, let them understand the need to reclaim their degraded land, for them to have the water fresh so that their terrestrial and aquatic life in the environment is restored, to reconstruct the ecosystem that would have been damaged over this period. And that's what we continue to do. At the point where we are today, we're happy to announce that we have 16 companies introduced to the various communities with the impacted land in Ogoniland. Those companies are on site. We've introduced them to the sites, and they are at work. We believe that this will be a continuous process until all the degraded land in this place is remediated. And after remediation, there will be a period of restoration. And for those who have read the UNEP report, that report is to be implemented over a period of 25 to 30 years. Most of this time will be for restoration of our
as we go on in the program. But then it's said that the very existence of man will certainly have will certainly impact on the environment. And so with natural causes and human activities, how do you begin to strike a balance as to sustain this planet, which is the only one we have so far, in spite of advances in science and forays into outer space? This is just the only home that mankind knows for now.
Okay, so for us, we are representing the civil society. So what we normally do is that, with respect to these environmental consequences, we do high-level advocacy, calling on all relevant stakeholders, drawing attention to these issues, to remediate, to restore, the environment and all that. And I want to start with a story. In 2015, there is a community in Niger State called Shikira Community. So the community was affected by lead poisoning. Over 20 children died. Over 68 needed urgent medical attention. We heard it from the news reports. So what we did immediately was that we went to the community to observe. We followed the money, so we worked with communities. Went to the community, and we noticed that even Doctors Without Borders, they were there. But they couldn't treat those children because the environment was already contaminated. So we came back after we've collected those human and good stories, and we said high-level advocacy, targeting the Minister of Environment. Then that was Madam Amina Mohammed, the current UN DSG. So we called her attention to it, called the attention of the relevant Senate committee on it, and we started rallying all the stakeholders around to address the issue. So after all the efforts, a national emergency was actually declared in that respect, and Amina Mohammed was able to, ensure that the community was made a provision for in the 2016 budget for a cleanup, for a remediation. So we followed through the process, go back to the community, sensitize them about the amount. It was around 500 million naira that was released. So we followed the money all through the entire process until the community was actually cleaned up. And as of now, as of mid-2017, the community was already cleaned up. So from the part of the civil society, we know that these issues are there, these challenges are there across the country. So whenever there is such an outbreak, we rally stakeholders together, and when funds are released, we follow the money to make sure that that the government does what.
Okay, the key word here you said sensitization. We'll return to sensitization and some of these activities. Putting certain measures in place so they don't start in the first place, but we'll return to that. Dr. Peter Tarfa, there are people who will tell you today that there's all so much fuss about climate change, and even the so-called advanced economies are pulling back. Yet, every day we continue to see the effects of climate change.
Thank you very much, Cyril, and thank you, viewers. The issue of climate change is indeed a reality. Science has proven it beyond any doubt. But basically, it is important to know that the issue of tackling climate change is about bread and butter. The international community have seen the need to tackle this particular problem, which is a global concern. However, like I said, it will cost huge amount of resources to be able to tackle that. It will also transform the way businesses are done all over the world. And to be able to do that, so-called developed country you mentioned that have appetite towards it, is not that because it is not a reality, but because of the quantum of resources that is involved in it. That is why they said is flair to their economy. But however, you will understand that what we are seeing globally all over, the challenges, the consequences of climate change, flooding all over, sea level rises, issues of forceful migration, which are all attributed to issues of climate change. Even in the area of food security too. So this is completely a reality, and science has proven that it is so. It is not a false.
Okay, thank you. We'll look at some of those effects, and we're battling with one very big one now. But let's come to Dr. Adepoju, the CEO of Forestry Research Institute.
Thank you.
The Earth's resources have been depleted, a lot of it through the activities of man, particularly in this part of the world. We used to know about forest reserves. I don't know whether we do still have them at this time, but what is certain is that forests have been depleted because of development. Cities have been built, mega cities, and once these are in place, the vegetation goes.
Thank you, Siri, and thank you, viewers. You just hit the point on the head. But we must also realize that this is something that has happened over the time. It's not just happening now. The Honorable Minister was with us in about a few days ago, and we tried to look at all of this issue. We realized that the forest reserve that our forefather painstakingly put in place for the country has depleted beyond 40–50%. But you will still appreciate that this current administration has tried to do its best via what we call green bond that is being floated now. And you'll be shocked that if what is done just last year alone has been the practice in the last 20 years, we will be far out of the crisis of the forest degradation that we have now. Just last year alone, all the agencies and departments responsible for planting under frame soil environment were able to put together 834.6 hectares of planting. And not only planting, the Honorable Minister has taken his time to be going after these plantations one by one. Now, if you add this to the only 4 million hectares of forest cover left in the country, that means in 1 year alone, we almost achieved 1 million, which has added to the only 4 million left, which is accounting for the 5% that Nigeria has as a forest cover. So just in 1 year, we're able to add 834.6. And we sustain that for 10 years. They will not be too far from eating the 25% required by the world standard of at least the forest cover Nigeria should have. Beyond that, when this current administration came on board and we had to brief the Mr. President, one of the things we are asked to look is what would be the alternative source of energy. We must find alternative source, and we don't see how to combine it to solve the food security problem. Then we're still going to run into crisis, and that's what brought about agroforestry. That while you are doing your arable cropping, you can still intercrop with various economic trees or hardwood, so that at the point they form canopy and you can no longer plant the arable crop, the return on the economic trees we've planted, which we have worked on more than 15 various Nigerian indigenous tree species now, who in the past or from the wild, you expect them to come to gestation, that's the cycle of maturity, at 20-25 years. But with the mandate and the push we have, we'll be able to shorten their gestation period to max 5 years of fruiting. So if a farmer can no longer do arable, and in 5 years, is getting return from ogbono, is getting return from agbalumo, is getting return from bitter kola, is getting return from vetilaria, that's shea butter, is getting return for pakia, that's locust bean, which will not only assist the subsistence farmer, but contribute to Nigeria GDP. So if we sustain this for the next 10-20 years, you will know that most farmers will go back to the village, and we'll be able to at least ensure that the environment is safe, as well as support the economic and social life of our people. Thank you.
All right, well, we'll come to that, because for me, I still see so many challenges here. The need to develop and the need to conserve nature. But let's go over to our Lagos Center, and where we're joined by Dr. Muktari Aminu Bello, Director General of the Nigerian Conservation Foundation, NCF. The need to conserve, I started talking about that, and the need to develop side by side. How do you strike a balance?
I think it's a false choice, Cyril, to think that you can either develop or conserve your natural resources. In fact, both must go together, because your development depends on the natural resources themselves. So however much difficult it is, we have to find a way to bring about that balance. And in many cases, there are low-hanging fruits. It's not so difficult. It's just a question of us realizing, as Nigerians, as human beings, that nature is a part of us and that we are a part of nature. And you cannot separate the two. We live in nature, we breathe nature, we eat nature, and nobody destroys his where he lives and then lives comfortably. So that balance must be found somewhere. And like I said, it's not so difficult in some cases. It is a bit more challenging in other cases. But even there, it's not rocket science to look after the environment and still develop. That is why the whole world came together right from the 1990s and started talking about sustainable development. So development that does not take care of the environment is not true development, because it's undermining the base, whether it's your economic base or your social base for which you develop. So I see it as like somebody sort of inheriting a pot of cash from his You have to really balance your spending with your income. So that's the balance that we need to get, and that's the balance that, like I say, there are many examples in all areas about how you can achieve that sustainable development so that you don't see development only as economic well-being. Development is not about how rich you get forever. It's not about only your material well-being. Development is also about your environmental well-being, your social well-being, and many other things. Your health, your education, your everything is just as important as your material richness and wealth. And that's why many people don't measure their progress of their community and the development of the community only in terms of the pile of cash you have. You measure your development and your well-being in a lot of other dimensions than just cash. And the more you think in terms of cash and the more you look at material well-being only to the detriment of all the other aspects of life that make you develop, then the more you think you should exploit nature to the maximum, and the more you get into these problems of environmental degradation that we are. But there is an alternative paradigm, an alternative model where you can still develop, abolish poverty, live reasonably well without undermining your environmental resources.
A little longer. And what we might ask at this point is, what's the level of awareness generally among the population? Because there's so many people who tend to think that the Earth's resources are limitless and human activities only at most provide a tiny scar on, the resources of the Earth. So how much awareness has been spread around the populace? There are people who do things and they just think, well, the Earth has been there for so many hundreds of thousands of years, and it's not what one generation does that's going to bring it down. And, people also have this idea that you're not even going to talk about what the effect of human activities would be in maybe 100 or 200 years and say, what do we bother? We're not going to be around at that time, are we?
You are right. I think the level of sensitization, the level of awareness is not enough. But there is enough data, enough scientific information if people care to look, and if people care to promote it. So those of us who are concerned and passionate about this issue need to do more in terms of getting awareness out there, sensitizing people right in the community, right across the whole country. But awareness should also go with admonishing people to change their habits, because part of the problem with environmental degradation, and as well part of the solution, is to do with the attitudes and behavior of the person on the street. And so some of it government needs to do some actions, some of it companies need to do the right action, but each of us as an individual, food is ready nation, as people say. We just want to eat what is available for today and forget about tomorrow. Now, that is really a huge task that a lot of us, especially those of us on civil society, do. And we have lots of different ways of doing it. We do it with school children to catch them young. We do it with communities in community. We do it with the press, just like what you are doing right here. And we have to do through all avenues really spread the awareness as much as possible. Now, if somebody says the environment will always be there as it is, all you need to do is point to him or her the problem that we are already having now of climate change, how it is getting warmer, how we are getting more floods, how we are getting more bushfires, how the storms are getting worse, how fodder is getting less, how many more conflicts we are having, And that might open their eye to the fact that really the environment is not an issue of tomorrow. It is already hitting us today.
About attitude, change of habits, change of attitude. Minister, let's look at another point that's been difficult to tackle, that of waste and pollution. Industrial waste, domestic waste, that is also a challenge for this part of the world, in this country especially. That's before we begin to go into what the government has been doing in terms of the organic cleanup, in terms of other environmental issues in the Niger Delta, for instance, and other matters. But first, the question of industrial waste and, of course, the very ones we are all too familiar with, the ones in the cities and towns and the household waste.
Yes, waste management is really a huge issue. It is also now an attitudinal thing. The regulatory agency that controls this waste management, either industrial or domestic waste, is doing their bit. But the attitude of the Nigerian is what is worrisome. People throw filth anywhere, and nobody cautions one another. But that is, again, what we all have to imbibe ourselves to take care of that. Industrial waste is what took us to the Ogoni cleanup, for example, but it doesn't only stop in Ogoni. All where we have industrial estates are having that sort of problem. Maybe before now, before the issue of the Ogoni, nobody pays attention to it, but if I take you, for example, to Kaduna, Kakuri, where the textiles were, while we were growing up, we really see these pollutions because where people used to do the irrigation along the river banks, we saw reduction in the quality of plants that sprout. We see also dead sites. We never knew what it was then, and there was no regulation to curb it. If you go to Kano, maybe the Chalawa estate, you see the Chalawa Gully, also the production there is very, very low without, people who are not taking care of those wastes. And oftentimes, our children go into those waters and come out with diseases that are incurable, not knowing the source. So following up these industries to see how they discharge this waste, and then there are laws in place to punish those who are in default of those laws.
Okay, we'll return to you in a moment, but let's go to the phones because our first caller is already on the line from Kaduna, Hausawa. Hello, good evening. Are you there with us?
Well, good evening, Mr.
Good evening.
Actually, my question goes like this. Please, I really want to know what the EPA is doing to protect the greenhouse gases emission that affects the global warming. And the second question is, I really want to know the source of greenhouse gases in Nigeria.
All right. Thank you very much. Straightforward question. And yes, Dr. Tarfa can take on that.
Yes, basically, you asked a question about what the EPA in Kaduna State is doing. It's important to let you know that we are operating a federal system, and the federal government have succeeded in assisting the states to establish states environmental agencies as well as climate change desk officers in the respective ministries of environment. Now, they are drawing most of their regulations and laws based on what is obtainable at the federal level. So we are collaborating with them very closely, and we know the situations all over the country in respect of what is expected of them to do. For instance, now in the area of emission reductions, what are they to do? I believe they don't have the guidelines and standards which they have put in place, but they are drawing what the federal has done in respect of NESRIA. The Honorable Minister have told you that NESRIA is following up on those standards. So the states are drawing from it, and also we have assisted them to develop what we call the climate change resilience strategy, so that they will be able to cope with climate change in their respective states. Your second question, you asked about the sources of the greenhouse gases. Basically, it is the fossil fuel, which is the #1 emission source of emissions of greenhouse gases, but it doesn't end also on fossil fuel alone. If you look at the decarbonization or the cutting down of trees itself, because trees are made up of carbon, and by the time you cut it or you burn it, you are releasing the carbon, and they mix with air and become carbon dioxide, which has high potential for high climate potential. So this is basically emissions from vehicles is a source of greenhouse gases, emissions from industries, emissions from burning of fossil fuel is basically source of emissions, as well as, like I said, from farming, clearing of farmland. That is why we kept on emphasizing the bush burning too. We kept on emphasizing that if you want to cool the earth, you plant a tree. So determined contribution, which informed the Paris Agreement, which Mr. President have signed. It has given us a blueprint on how to cope, and we have realized that the 5 sectors that emits most of the greenhouse gases in Nigeria are basically agriculture, oil and gas sector, transportation, because the number of vehicles we have on our highways are very enormous, and also from industrialization, and then the power sector. These 5 sectors are the major emitters of greenhouse gases, and for you to cope these emissions, you have to put in place a strategy on how to move the processes in these sectors to the green economic pathway.
All right, we'll return to you shortly, but we have another caller from Lagos, calling in from Lagos. Right. Hello?
Hello?
Yes, go right ahead.
Hello?
Go right ahead.
Hello, good evening.
Yes, good evening.
Yeah, my question is... Hello? Yeah, my question is, I would like to know what the federal government is doing regarding turning waste to wealth, because it's an untouched sector. You know, there's a possibility for us turning the waste into wealth, like using some of these domestic waste or industrial waste to generate biogas, which we can use to provide electricity or even maybe just light up street lights. There's also a possibility for us to use some of these agro waste to provide or cultivate fruits like edible mushrooms. You know, I did it in my undergraduate project, and Federal Institute of Industrial Research, Oshodi, I think they are doing something on that. Now, these are ways that we can actually help in alleviating poverty and also generating electricity. Is there anything the federal government is actually doing to invest more in that aspect? Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Yes.
Thank you. Let me just answer quickly on those 2 issues. Probably you are not aware. I know in more than 10 states now, federal government has installed metal waste plant and plastic waste plant. And I'm happy you talk about the agricultural waste that is being used for mushroom production and all of that. And beyond that, we're even into collection of this polythene that they use for sachet water and co, and has been converted to selling material, as well as the degradable polypod material that we use in seed raising. So all of that is being done. If you want to know more about that, I think I will invite you to visit Forest Research of Nigeria. You will see a lot of waste-to-weight material that we have developed. But I can tell you authoritatively that the federal government had put in place, I know there's one in Sokoto, I know there's one that's going on in Nasarawa, I know there's one in Oyo State, but I am very sure we have in more than 10 states where metal plants are put to convert waste metal to do it as a business, but at least to put it in place to support the state that have such plant in their state, to take ownership of it and continue to run it to support various waste in that state. Thank you.
All right. Let me quickly return to Dr. Tarfa here. You spoke earlier of the main cause of greenhouse gases, and talking about emissions from vehicles or transportation system. Is there any regulation regarding the emissions from vehicles on the roads? I know some countries have strict regulations about it. Do we have any such regulation in Nigeria?
Certainly we have. We have those regulations which is being operated and enforced by the Nigerian Environmental Standards Regulation and Enforcement Agency, that is NESRA. But you also have to take into account that this is a developing country.
Right.
And as a developing country, there's what we call survival emissions. You cannot just wake up absolutely and say a vehicle that is maybe 5 years old or 10 years old should not be imported into the country. You have to put into fact, you have to consider the socio-economic development of the country in itself. But by and large, what the climate change regime is encouraging is the gradual movement away from carbon-intensive vehicles into the renewable energy vehicles that are being produced by the developed world. For instance, when we went to Poland for the Conference of Parties, virtually all the buses that were used by the delegates in moving up and down are electric vehicles with zero emissions. So these are things that are gradually coming forward. And some countries, developed countries, have already put legislation by saying by the year 2020 or 2030, they are going to phase out carbon-intensive vehicles. They are reducing the emissions. Another area that is gaining traction is use of ethanol. The last caller talked about biomass. Yes. So these are all cleaner sources of energy, which the engines are being retrofitted. The Climate Change Department in the Ministry of Environment is already in discussions as a fallout towards the implementation of the Paris Agreement in Nigeria by having discussions with the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change to introduce what we call hydrogen economy. The hydrogen economy will help us to mop up all the waste in Lagos. We are using Lagos as the pilot city because of the quantum of waste that is found in Lagos. This will now be converted into hydrogen, and the technology is there that vehicles are coming that will use hydrogen as a means of transportation. So what will be the emissions that will be coming out from the vehicles is water. When hydrogen mixes with oxygen, it produces water, and it has not effect on the climate.
All right. Still back, Minister, back to domestic waste. Dr. Ajibwa, you started talking about it. And a lot of these packages are biodegradable. What is the thinking of government? Because this is a huge source of pollution.
Yes, it is a huge source of pollution. But like the DG of Frein told you, we have, as a pilot in his school, done some pilot to use this polythene, for example, to mix with some other wastes to come up with ceiling boards that could be used in our houses, to also use it as the container for putting our seeds to in our nurseries. Those products now become biodegradable, so to speak. But in the whole of this, I see an economy, if properly tapped, we could engage this, our teeming youth, in the collection of some of this waste.
All right, so you know,
and some money,
exactly,
and some money, take it to a place where it can be converted into further wealth. So if we look at the whole of this conversation, we can see that a positivity can come out of this seemingly problem that we all see. All we need is the right setting, the right discussion with these teeming youths that ordinarily, we have seen an example of that in one of the administrations in Lagos State that used those youth to collect those wastes, made some money, cleaned up the environment, and everybody is happy. So it's a win-win, and that's what government is trying to pursue.
All right. Akola from Lagos actually talked about waste to wealth, and that's all part of it. But let's return to the cleanup of Ogoniland and the commitment to it. Yes, this is a project that, you know, it's not a short term. It's something that will most certainly, you know, outlast 2 administrations from now. And so the question skeptics have always asked is one that deals with many issues in Nigeria. The commitment, the sustainability, and ensuring that this project goes on and is not aborted midway for any reason whatsoever.
Very good. You can see the commitment of government. I think we are at a stage where you can't reverse what has been started. One, we have got the international buy-in because United Nations is involved. They are the author of the report, and they are involved. As I speak with you now, a United Nations team is right there in Ogoniland assessing what we have done so far. The financing of this project is right there, sitting in the accounts, and consistent subscription to the fund will continue. What do we have in place as a mechanism? We have a governing council that is inclusive of indigenous Ogoni people. We have a board of trustees that consists of indigenous Ogoni people. And of all of these places, the contractor over the site, no, we engage the community leadership so as also to get the buy-in of the community. And so I don't think this thing can be reversed by any one administration, even if the administration of Muhammadu Buhari passes on. All other administration cannot reverse what we have started today.
Let's talk about some of the theories we get to hear, especially the activities of the multinationals and regarding this project. It has always been felt that this may not be to their advantage, and therefore there are, you know, cogs that they can always put in the wheel. Another area I'd want you to look at as well is the issue of gas flaring. Gas flaring and revenues, where people pay to flare the gas, but destroys the environment.
Yeah, thank you very much. With regards to
whether the multinationals are a problem to the project or to HYPREP, certainly not. The cleanup is a multi-stakeholder activity. It's an exercise, an activity that is beneficial to all the parties, beneficial to the local communities, beneficial to the oil companies. It is a process that allows for improvement, our regulatory agencies, and all that it takes for a better environment. And what is it that the companies have done so far? They have given their commitment to release the funds. The funds sitting in the Board of Trustees account are those released by the oil companies. There's no stronger commitment you could get than that. And they continue to work with HYPREP, including providing from the background support services. So there is so much the oil companies are doing. But we all understand the effect of oil pollution on health, on the environment, on our economy. Because, for example, where you see situations of artisanal refining and all of those activities that do not only just pose a threat to the human beings who are doing it, but also our economy, to the environment. And so collectively, we all have to halt it, and the oil companies are in the forefront of that, as well as the community and government, who is rolling out all the laws and ensuring that regulators are effective in doing what they have to do. Gas flaring is an issue that also we need to look at. But behind that, it's the need to probably review some of the laws that we currently have, because the process or the need to do this is far more important than whatever benefit that we currently enjoy.
Well, yes.
Yeah, I want to take it up from that. I know that some of all these environmental consequences are disasters. They're actually quite many. And as a developing country, we could even have insufficient revenues to address most of all these issues. You know, just like about clean energy, about electric vehicles, we can't just transit to that because we're a developing country. We don't even have, most of all these vehicles are very, very costly. You know, pollution from textile industries and all that. But there are some kind of low-hanging fruits, and that's been bothering the civil society for some time. Taking gas flaring, for instance, we are talking about the organic cleanup. You know what was done within decades, and now we're trying to address that. But looking at gas flaring, in some oil-producing communities, health, even livelihoods, reduction in farm produce, farm yield, poor yield and all that, even health issues, and, we witness it firsthand, and we think that the government can do something about it in that regard. Looking at comparatively, we have several oil-producing countries in the world, from Indonesia to Brazil to the Gulf, to the Gulf country, but they don't have some of all these issues, spillage, flaring. So we should also look at what we could learn from them, in terms of addressing all those issues, because they're kind of accumulating, leading to climate change, leading to some of all those issues. And I think, regulatory-wise, a lot could still be done in that regard.
All right. Let's return to the phones briefly before we get a response to that. And from Jos, Ada is calling in tonight. Hello, Ada.
Yes, hello, good evening.
Good evening.
Ada from Jos. The idea of destroying illegal makeshift refineries in the Niger Delta is a source of concern, because in the process of destroying them by the military or task force, it further destroys the environment. Need to use restiveness, make those engaged in this illegal activity to become more militant. In my opinion, it would have been better to engage those involved, give them adequate training, build modular refineries for them. This will enable them to take out a living, thus making them reasonable citizens. Another concern is the deforestation. There is an increase in indiscriminate cutting of trees now because of the high cost of kerosene. No amount of sensitization can stop the poor masses from getting involved in this act. So what is the government doing to address this issue of high cost of kerosene? God bless Nigeria.
All right. Thank you very much, Ada. Two powerful questions there. Minister, you want to take on that?
Yes. Thank you very much, Ada, for this, your observation, and I think they are very, very key. Now, part of the process of the organic cleanup is to engage the youth, empower women, and also be discussing with critical stakeholders. on one hand. Secondly, there are livelihood projects that will engage the youths, give them some training, skill acquisition, and empower them so that they can be useful citizens and not go on this busting pipes and so on, so therefore degrading the land more. Now, on the fuel issue, government is also looking at a situation. We have done a lot of acquisition of gas stoves, which is going to be shared to some people as a pilot. Then when we see the acceptability from the citizenry, then it could be, the number could be increased. There is also another stove that we have fabricated and as a test that will be using briquettes. What do we do to produce these briquettes? Waste from sawdust, husks of rice, since we are now a rice-growing nation, so the husks that are byproducts of those rice will be used to make briquettes, and we will use them for fuel to cook, and then it will reduce.
Of course, talking about the price of fuel, kerosene, for instance, and says there's no amount of sensitization that will stop the masses from felling trees for firewood. So the question of deforestation is a lingering one. I'd like to hear your comments on that.
Yes, thanks, Cyril, for that question, because that's an area where my organization, the Nigerian Conservation Foundation, is really, really concerned about. We've actually worked with many stakeholders to, again, as Dr. Adepoju said, really support whatever the government and everyone else is doing so that we can increase the forest cover in the country. It is appalling that we are losing between 350,000 to 400,000 hectares of land every year. And it is appalling that Nigeria has one of the highest rates of deforestation in the world. And Adao is right, the caller, that you can't just stop this by fiat. You can't do it by sensitization. You have to provide alternatives. And again, like I say, we can't put all of this on the government alone, although the government should be the driver. But still, the main issue about energy and use of firewood is a key issue for Nigeria, because more than 60% of households are using firewood. And they are using firewood in 3-stone fires, or open fire, really. And then they put a pot on it, and most of the energy disappears. So we need to bring more fuel-efficient stove. They are also burning the wood directly. We need to use more packed energy like briquettes and charcoal, as people said. But one of the most painful things about deforestation in Nigeria is that we are also an exporter of charcoal. Can you imagine that not only are we having the highest rate of deforestation, but we are cutting down our trees, burning them and getting all the pollution, and then exporting charcoal to other countries that use it. Meanwhile, even in our cities, like the city I come from, Kano, you find out that people are not even using charcoal stoves or briquettes. They are using raw firewood on open fire. So deforestation is really a horrible, big issue that Nigeria has to address, because it is causing massive desertification. People talk about desert encroachment as if the desert is coming from Niger and Chad to meet us. No, this desert is made in Nigeria. It's by the cutting of trees, by poor looking after of our soils, by all these bad practices on irrigation, agriculture, logging, and all of these, that we are creating deserts internally. And in order to really stem that, we need to grow more trees. We need to get more energy efficient. We need to bring alternative sources of energy for cooking in Nigeria. That is a national emergency, I think.
Yeah, just to add to what my brother Dr. Mutar just said, I think we also need the support of state.
Right.
You are very aware that the federal government has no land except the one acquired before the Land Use Act. And when state, even when we meet in National Council on Environment and we had agreement as to what to do with our various land, trying under the current administration to see how we can go into an MOU with state and say, okay, leave this 500 hectares. I'll give you an example of Niger State. Just because it wants us to help reforestate Niger State, willingly sign an MOU of 1,000 hectares with us, that this land is given to government, but for this purpose alone. The same thing, just a letter that I was directed to write to the Ondo State governor over the, because we have somewhere called Queen's Plot in Ondo State. People come all the way from Australia to come and see this Queen's Plot just for the 2 hectares. But a tree in Queen's Plot, the base alone is bigger than this studio. But we discovered that some people, illegal fellas, enter and drop about 120 stumps there, and we agree with the governor of the state that nobody will pick those trees, they will rot there and go back to the nature. How many states is giving such a cooperation to Federal Ministry of Environment?
Okay.
If this